for many years now, and we really enjoy collaborating with this institute on events that address challenges and opportunities to further the Canada-U.S. relationship. I would like to thank the director of the Canada Institute, David Biette, who unfortunately is in Canada today, and his close collaborators, Ken Christ and Laura Pedro, for the great work that they did in organizing this conference today. A special thanks also to my close collaborator, Michael Abensauer, for once again doing an amazing job in collaboration with David, Ken, and Laura. I would also like to thank this morning's panelists and moderators for their pertinent remarks and insight into this very important and complex topic. I really enjoyed both panels, but I must admit that I might have been a little biased this morning since one of the speakers was my father. So in promoting Quebec's energy is a family affair in Quebec. We really felt that it was important for us to be part of this discussion because on energy and climate change policy, Quebec has partnered with neighboring provinces and American states and organizations to promote the use of clean and renewable energy, and also to figure out ways to lower our carbon footprint. The province has pioneered cutting-edge long-distance transmission line technology in response to the unique weather and geographic conditions of Quebec. Quebec has more than 20,000 miles of transmission lines crisscrossing the province. Consequently, transmission infrastructure and technology have been priorities for Quebec for decades. Many in the room will remember that in 2003, Quebec was able to keep its lights on despite the blackout that crippled Ontario and 9 or 8 northeastern states. The system has been continuously upgraded over the years in the aftermath of events like the solar flare storm of '89 and the 1998 ice storms. We are always looking to work with regional and federal partners to not only share our transmission expertise, but increase interconnections between Quebec and the rest of Canada and the United States. In the meantime, we hope to see Quebec become a global model on how to integrate intermittent renewable energy sources within a larger grid. I must add that we are on track to becoming one of Canada's larger wind power sources, which is a perfect complement to our existing hydroelectric capacity. All of this clean power capacity becomes meaningless if we don't have the basic transmission infrastructure up and running in order to deliver the electricity to where it's needed. We hope today's discussion was another positive step in propelling a North American transmission dialogue forward. That is why it is my great pleasure to introduce Deputy Assistant Secretary Hoffman of the Department of Energy, who directs the Office of Electricity Delivery and Energy Reliability at the Department of Energy. Her office is responsible not only for modernizing, securing, and enhancing the nation's grid, but provides key national leadership on these issues. I also had a chance to meet her first last June. She plays a leadership role in the clean energy dialogue that was set up by Prime Minister Harper and President Obama. So let me introduce her. But Patricia Hoffman, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary, was named Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Office of Electricity Delivery and Energy Reliability at the United States Department of Energy in November 2007. Prior to her current position, she served in a dual capacity as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Research and Development and Chief Operating Officer within Office of Electricity Delivery and Energy Reliability. Prior to joining that office, she was the Program Manager for the Federal Energy Management Program within the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy at the United States Department of Energy. Patricia Hoffman holds a Bachelor's of Science and a Master of Science in Ceramic Science and Engineering from Penn State University. I think everybody knows that she's a recognized expert on renewable energy, energy efficiency, and energy delivery. We are really happy that she was able to take some time off today from what I know is a really busy schedule. So please welcome Patricia Hoffman.
Thank you very much, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today and continuing the dialogue that was started this morning. I thought it was an excellent morning and an excellent conversation. I will do my best not to give you all indigestion as I speak and challenge the thoughts and the concepts some more as we move forward. But there is a great debate that's going on. And there is a lot that we need to deal with as we move the country forward. First thing I want to say is I noticed that in one of the brochures we were talking about advancing the energy dialogue. And one of the things that I'm after and one of the things that I'm trying to drive is grounding the energy dialogue, which means putting engineering and analysis back into the discussion. A lot of people have talked about the utilities don't want to speak up, they don't want to talk. We have to have some more interjection and some more understanding coming from the utilities, coming from the sector, so that we can continue to increase the dialogue as well as the sophistication of the dialogue. So one of the things I'm trying to drive is bringing transparency and clarity and consistency in the debate. So as we move forward, we have to drive to answers, not only have discussions among ourselves, but find a way to get to some answers, to resolve some issues, or at least to bring a better clarity and understanding of the issues that we're dealing with today. So I have about 6 points that I'd like to bring up today as part of the lunch discussion, and then we'll move from there, and I'll take some questions at the end to wrap things up. I do believe we have a North American grid. We have to look at how the grid in the United States complements the grid in Canada. I think we need to look collectively at some of the issues and at some of the opportunities. Within the United States, we have had a lack of investment and a lack of transparency, so we need to move that forward. The example that was talked about this morning of the 2003 blackout, I actually struggle with that because within the Department of Energy, it took us over 6 months, if not longer, 9 months, to do the analysis of the 2003 blackout. I mean, that's embarrassing for an industry as we look forward to move forward of being dynamic in nature and being able to handle more instantaneously what is happening on the system, and it takes us that long to gather information, to analyze the information. So we really, really need to come together on how to bring the resources as well as the information and a certain level of transparency so that we can actively operate the grid in a dynamic nature. I also am a little frustrated and such that congestion still exists. I mean, with the knowledge and the willpower that's still out there and the talk about congestion in the United States, that we still have congestion in the United States somewhat befuddles me. It tells me that we're not exactly there in our understanding of operations and markets, or that we're not at least to the point that we actually can use the two to balance each other to resolve some of the problems. And so one of the things that I'm looking at is how do we actually move forward so that in a couple years from now we can say we have a game plan to look at reducing some of the congestion in the United States or in Canada as we move forward, but look at ways to solve problems. If there's a disturbance on the system, an oscillation that's occurring, how do we really get the engineering knowledge behind it, the transparency and the analysis to make sure that we drive to a solution? The next 2 points I'm going to pair with each other, and for a very specific reason. We talk a lot about generation and generation portfolio. I actually would like to encourage, as we have conversations, to talk about generation and demand. So, because they go hand in hand, we balance them with each other. Demand provides elasticity in the marketplace. And so as we go forward in conversations, I'd like to be able to, talk about one and then talk about the sister component on the other side. So let's first start with generation. We need diversity. I'm sorry, no matter what portfolio we want to look at, we need to have diversity. We need to look at the resources that we have or that we are willing to develop within the states and look at the opportunity to develop those resources, then look at what other resources maybe that we want to bring in from other states or across the nation. But we need to have diversity. One size is not going to fit all. I think we should learn some of the lessons of the past and make sure that as we move forward in the United States, we bring diversity and we ensure diversity is at the table. Renewables. With renewables, the key thing in my mind is predictability. As we look at renewable resources, we really want to be able to predict with a greater level of accuracy when the wind's blowing, when the sun is shining. So that's adding more tools to the table, whether it's the weather forecasting, but we need to actually have some predictability, which will allow some certainty, which will allow consistency and the ability to plan with a greater level of accuracy. On the other side of energy management, I think it was talked a little bit this morning, I'm going to reemphasize some points, is actually looking at peak load reduction and demand response. And what I want is the instantaneous capability to be able to adjust load or be able to turn something off and to be able to look at the demand side of the equation. It is a valuable asset that can be provided to the system. The Texas example was discussed this morning. I think there are many more opportunities there. So as we look at it, we need to be able to figure out how that can contribute more and how we can recognize the value of that resource. As we move forward, it's really looking at asset utilization. So how can we flatten some of those loads? How can we minimize the peak and flatten the loads across the system as well as within the consumer? And I think that's an approach that we really need to try to move forward towards, is how do we try to minimize some of the peaking issues and actually flatten the loads. Consumer energy management. As we talk about energy management, I agree with your point that it's probably the most exciting, competitive part of what's happening in the electric sector, but it shouldn't dominate the electric sector and dominate the whole discussion. One size doesn't fit all when we talk about consumers. So I would ask people to think about that as we look at the consumer side of the equation. Not all consumers are going to want to be as sophisticated with managing their resources. Other people want basically a hands-off approach. So as we move forward on the consumer side of the equation, look for flexibility and tailor our solutions to the customer's needs. Whether it's a low-income customer or another customer that just really loves to play in the stock market and would love to play with their energy as they would play in the stock market. We need to tailor some of the solutions to the needs of the customer. So once again, one size does not fit all as we look at consumer energy management. The next point that I'd like to bring up that was discussed this morning was optimizing the system and reminding ourselves that we got to look at the cost impact and the competitiveness. We are in a competitive market. The generation technologies are going to compete with each other, and we have to recognize that as part of the equation, as looking at whether we bring wind from offshore or wind from another part of the country, as we look at solar resources. All these resources are competing with each other. And as we look at developing generation, we have to have the generation, the transmission, and the buyer. So as we're putting transmission on the system, we've got to have those three components. Building transmission without a buyer, we're not exactly fully there. So we've got to make sure that we have those components so we actually can continue to stimulate the competitive marketplace. As we look at competitive markets, we got to figure this out. There's a lot of inconsistencies out there. We have to look at how do we want to right-size the markets, how do we want to look at the operations, how do we get to where we can balance price stability as well as minimize volatility as we move forward. The other thing is, are there new utility business models? Are there new innovative practices that we should be considering? I know FERC has a notice out for looking at balancing areas. Are there some more innovative things that we can come up with respect to markets? I think we should explore that. As we're looking at the dynamic nature of operating the system, I think we actually have to also look at what are the opportunities on the market side of the equation. One thing I am excited to see is, and to recognize, we were talking about it at our table, is the smart grid and the electric sector is now exciting. And it is an economic engine. And I was really pleased to see the economic development that's starting to occur with respect to investment in the electric sector and the energy sector. And I hope that continues to grow, because it is an ability to create jobs and to look at opportunities for applications and new technology. And it's an exciting time to be as part of the electric sector. And so I hope that continues. And as we look at it, how do we continue to stimulate future markets and future technologies? Some of the things that was brought up this morning. With respect to security, I'm actually going to probably change the dialogue a little bit there. What I want to encourage is resiliency. And it comes down to, what is our expectations of utilities? Are we really going to be expected to gold plate everything to prevent any instance from happening, whether it's a hurricane or a cyber event? I think we need to be adaptable, and the system has to be adaptable to changing conditions. And so what we need to do in moving forward is make sure that we look at how can we ensure the system is resilient, so that we can adapt to changing weather conditions, we can adapt to extreme conditions, whether it's a solar flare or a hurricane or something else that happens on the system. But the system has to be flexible, which goes back to the diversity of the generation and the utilization of consumers and the demand side of the equation. We have to really look at how we continue to be more resilient and flexible. As I move forward, I think we are resonating that ultimately the goal is greater dynamic optimization and operation of the system. We want to get to a point where we're more predictive, so that we actually can think ahead of the game versus reacting all the time. So the more things, the more tools and technologies and capabilities we can put into the system to allow us to predict more, to allow us to understand faster what's going on, the better off we'll be in the long run in looking at resolving some disturbances or other events that are occurring on the system. Another goal, how do we support wholesale markets and wholesale power flows, as well as continue to stimulate microgrids in the regional marketplace? You know, we talked about this morning of the grid necessarily wasn't intended to be built for power to flow across great distances, but it's being used, and it's going to be used in that fashion. But yet we're going to have to balance it with some of the local needs in developing microgrids and community. And we're going to have to find a way to balance the two and recognize the value of the two. Because when we talk about security and sustainability, there is a value to having resources close to the load. So recognize that, and it's a key part of the equation that I don't think we should lose. I go back because I'm going to reiterate, we need to figure out what do we expect from utilities with respect to reliability and -1 contingencies. How do we define reliability in the sense of cybersecurity? What do we expect out of the utility? What is the business model for the utility? And I think that's going to have to evolve and be reviewed and looked at over time, because there's great opportunities with respect to utilities providing services to customers, whether it's energy management services, but there's a wealth of opportunities. I think we can look at business models to see what is best as we move forward in the marketplace. We talked about the interconnection planning a little bit. I'll talk about it a little bit more in a minute. But my goal is to build capability. We have a lot of challenging questions that are coming at us, whether we should have a low carbon future, whether we should import, whether we should look at renewable resources that are more localized. How do we start comparing some of those different options so that we actually can present to politicians, regulators, to even the community in general, what is the best solution, or if we go down this path, this is the cost. So what we want to do is build the capability so that we actually can bring transparency and actually have an educated debate. And that's what I want to have as we move forward with the interconnection planning process, is look at multiple scenarios, but also look at, if you want this, here's the cost, here's the requirements, here is the engineering analysis behind it. Some people are coming up to me and saying, hey, water is the next biggest issue. Okay, well, trying to deal with, let's look at the option for low carbon. Now we're going to look at the options for water issues and water constraints. So once again, it goes back to building the capability that we can do some analysis and be able to come with at least some educated options and solutions to some of the problems. Workforce. We briefly mentioned it this morning. We talked about it a little bit at our table. It is critical that we develop our workforce in the United States. It is critical that we go beyond just traditional power engineering and become multidisciplinary. That power engineers understand what phasers do and what renewable impacts are on the system, to cybersecurity. We're really going to have to develop a new set of students coming out of the colleges that are more multidisciplinary, so we can tackle and meet some of the challenges of the future. So the department does have a workforce solicitation that it closed, and we're planning on doing an announcement probably in the next couple of weeks on that. So DOE activities, just to kind of summarize, hopefully you'll see how our activities is fitting where I'm heading and where I'm trying to go with the vision and how we're going to drive the discussion and the debate. Interconnection planning, we did the 6 awards with the interconnections. One was to provide support to do engineering analysis. The other was to provide support to the states. And what I hope will occur is the states will start continuing to define their priorities. What do they set as their goals? Then we can pull that together and say, okay, how do we want to do this on a regional level? It would have been nice to, we tried to push it as high as possible at the interconnection level. We could have done it more on regions, but we'll see how well it goes. I mean, I wanted to push it as high as possible so we could get that dialogue to the greatest extent possible from a largest region. With the interconnection solicitation, we'll do multiple scenarios. We'll look at what should some of the futures, I think we called it alternative futures, look like, and then try to do the engineering analysis underneath it so we can understand the cost impacts and how would we meet, say, targets and goals for a low carbon future. Our department also does presidential permits for transmission across the borders, and we'll continue to support that. There was an announcement on the Montana-Alberta line, the MATA line, and we continue to support the activities for presidential permits. Then the final thing that I just wanted to bring up was the smart grid activities. The smart grid activities really is going forward and adding intelligence to the system, but it's across the whole system. Meters are just one component in that activity. I sent a note trying to figure out whether it was really 80% of the funds, but I didn't get an exact answer. So I would say from my perspective that the intent was not to just focus on meters. Meters is just one capability that adds value to consumers in the system. There is other ways for consumers to get real-time pricing data, real-time information, and we'll continue to support those as alternative pathways. But meters is just one option. What we wanted to do is actually look at capabilities on the transmission as well as the distribution side of the equation. So the projects that are coming out, the tax issue, thank you, are resolved for the investment grant projects, and we are working on the demonstration part of it. We haven't had a notice from Treasury on that. But our goal there is to continue to stimulate the economy, to continue to provide a framework for innovation. We talked about the telephone analogy. We really want to get beyond where we can look at some really cool applications and some different things that can be developed. But the important thing that I want to say is the Smart Grid Investment Grants are a partnership between the federal government and the state governments. It is not beyond me. I mean, we recognize that this is a partnership that has to be seen as a partnership. The ratepayers are paying, and the federal government. It's a 50-50 cost share, and we really need the participation from the states to make sure that we look at this partnership of what is the best value for consumers. What are some of the options that we want to put forward on the system that will advance the system? What are some of the lessons learned, and what are the cost benefits? So what we're going after here is to continue to accelerate that partnership and make sure we come to decisions and we come to a greater understanding through some of the demonstrations on what the costs and benefits are. So that is our goal and what we're trying to drive with respect to the smart grid. And with that, actually, I think I'll wrap up at this point in time and take any questions if anybody has any questions for me.
Thank you, Patricia. Ken England with the Canadian Embassy. I believe you said at the front end of your speech that you believe we have a North American grid. Certainly in Canada, that's well understood, probably less so in the United States, broadly speaking. I'm wondering, I guess, first off, to what extent that guides DOE's thinking with respect to the programs that you're now putting into place, and whether you're satisfied that you have sufficient cross-border dialogue. There was reference to the clean energy dialogue, for example, but whether you think there's a sufficient two-way flow of information and coordination to ensure that the goals of sustainability, reliability, and security are being met.
My initial answer is no. I think we need more coordination. You can take a look at the phaser measurement units as an example. One of the tough issues that we have to deal with is sharing of information between the United States and Canada. And I think that is a challenge and a debate that we need to make sure that we have so we actually can resolve that issue. With respect to the interconnection planning, I know that Canada and the provinces are participating in the interconnection planning process. I'm very pleased with that. I think that's the right thing to do and the way to go as we move forward, because there are options of bringing power down from Canada on the interconnection planning. So I think that that's moving in the right direction. Challenges, definition of renewables. Hydro. There's a lot of more discussion that I think between the United States and Canada that we have to get more engaged in. So the answer is mixed, but I think there's a lot more that can be done.
I think that we're in the middle of a tremendous technological and even scientific revolution in terms of energy. And for 30 years, the United States has neglected its research and development in energy. In fact, there was a decline, a threefold decline since 1979. I'm happy to say that the Obama administration was the first one to really reverse that with a little help from the recession. And you, in fact, provided a lot of money in the stimulus package for research and development. But the problem is this. It looks like it's going to be a one-year sort of effort. I mean, is there any plan to sustain this over time? The only way you get the universities really involved is if you give them some promise that they're going to have funding over a continuing period of time. This looks like just a one-shot deal. Am I wrong?
With respect to the stimulus funds, right now, unless Congress passes another stimulus act, it is a one-shot deal. And so what we need to do is gain as much knowledge and set the foundation as much as possible with the projects and the activities and build the capabilities, and working with the universities and looking at what's beyond. We do have the annual appropriations within the Department of Energy. And I would say for the first time within the Department of Energy, we actually have a across the department approach towards energy storage, which is probably the first time I've actually seen a consistent energy storage message come out of the Department of Energy. So with the annual appropriations, I think you'll see more investment in the department. It just may not be from one office, For example, with energy storage, we have the ARPA-E efforts plus the demonstration stuff that's being done in our office. But it is a strategic collective approach to try and looking at resolving a problem. You'll probably see some more activities looking at probably modeling and the capabilities of how do we bring some mathematical relationships to provide greater understanding of what's happening on the electric sector. That will come out. So what the department is doing is actually bringing multiple capabilities to solve a problem. So granted, we will not have the stimulus level funding, but I think you will see a strong approach from the annual appropriations in tackling some problems.
Thank you. Christopher Krause from the National Environmental Education Foundation. You mentioned improving forecast skill as sort of a priority. I was just wondering if maybe you could elaborate on some of the things the Department of Energy is doing to improve, sort of lay the groundwork for better forecasting to support renewable energy deployment. Do you have partnerships with other agencies or things like that?
Yeah, there's probably two approaches. Within the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, they're looking at forecasting of wind resources as well as solar resources and some of those modeling of the availability of that renewable generation. And so what we want to do is tie that information into the operations of the grid, because what we may end up looking at is, okay, we have a high capacity wind, you know, a level 7 or with the levels of wind, but it all blows at night. Do we want to compare that to, say, a lower capacity wind that's blowing more closer to when it's needed, and then look at the compensation of storage or gas-fired generation as we balance it? So it's going to evolve the conversation so we can really consider the negative pricing of wind that's currently going on in Texas and some of the things that we're seeing, and how do we really optimize those assets? I think it comes back to gaining as much information as possible in order to optimize assets and utilization of the system. So those are the two things. There's another activity that we're looking at is how do we share information across balancing areas, so that if you want to add a larger penetration of wind but you have a very small balancing area, how do we share that information across the neighboring balancing area so we can actually get greater penetration of renewables or maximize the capability?
My name is Michael Abensauer. I'm with the Quebec Government Office here in Washington. My question is deal with backstop authority, federal backstop authority, and some of the policy proposals on the Hill would mandate the FERC having some land. I want to get your thoughts on that because I know regionally there is some emphasis on planning for transmission siting and whatnot, but you know, with NIMBY, Banana, Dada, all the other ones I heard this morning, it seems like there's always a final element. Usually it's a local, regional element that stops it, everything but the actual building of these lines. And I know in our case, between Canada and Northeast United States, you know, these are legitimate issues that we come across pretty regularly, and it takes almost a Herculean effort to get through them. So I want to get your thoughts on how you perceive that and what your recommendations are.
I don't know if I have recommendations. It's a challenging debate that's currently going on. With the FERC backstop authority was challenged in the Fourth Circuit, in which the states make a decision. FERC cannot overrule that decision with respect to siting of transmission lines. I don't know if there's a good answer to it. It's something that we need to look at, and the federal legislation is trying to address that. I probably have taken an approach that as we do planning and as we bring information to the table, it comes down to how do we educate the consumer over what is the best value approach as we move forward with respect to transmission assets or looking at alternative options such as distributed generation, demand reduction. So the debate, I would agree the debate actually has to go to convincing the consumers that we've looked at these approaches, We've looked at the alternatives, and here is the best value solution for the United States as we move forward. If we had more of that information on the table, my hope is that we would minimize some of the problems that are occurring. I don't have a silver bullet, and I'm not sure there is a silver bullet solution. Is that it? Okay, well, thank you.
So I want to thank Patricia for an excellent presentation. I think the information that she gave us will be really helpful as we move forward. I must mention that seeing people like Patricia at DOE, Kimberly in the state of New York, playing such active leadership roles makes me really confident about all this as we move forward. So thank you again for participating in this conference, and really looking forward to seeing you again at a future event. Merci beaucoup. Bonjour.